Mortgage rates are now at a 16-year high not seen since 2006. How much higher can mortgage rates go? Let's talk about it. Earlier this year, there were a lot of skeptics that doubted that the Feds meant business when Chairman Jerome Powell said he was going to put an end to excess inflation.
Inflation is much too high, and we're moving expeditiously to bring it back down. We have both the tools we need and the resolve that it will take.
He made no secret of this, but there seemed to be a naive denialism from a lot of people. Some people twisted themselves into a knot trying to reframe the current reality to encourage people to continue buying and selling homes. Personally, I thought people needed to slow down and carefully assess their next moves. I got a fair amount of downvotes for expressing such an unpopular opinion at that time. There's a skewed view that buying and owning a home is good for everyone at all times, when situationally that is not always true. We may be entering an economic situation where buying a home is just not a good thing for some people. My first perspective on mortgage rates is always first as an asset owner and as an investor, not necessarily as a licensed broker. I like to know the collateral effects of economic changes, not changes that simply have a direct impact on me. As a real estate professional, I view my primary job to advise, educate, and consult others on real estate matters that they first own and invest in. Everything else is secondary. Sometimes that advice to people is to simply sit still and just see how things play out. You don't always have to do something. The reason for that is that there are large financial and intangible costs for any buy or sell real estate transaction, but few people want to acknowledge that. If you pay attention to the financial news today, it is impossible to ignore all the talk and news about inflation, the Fed, increasing interest rates, and the transitioning real estate market. A lot of people believe that mainstream media magnify negative effects. And that may be true, but most of us are individuals. We're not in the mainstream media. All we can do is individually react and maneuver our way through the economic changes by carefully minding our own business affairs, no matter the causation. Most of us have the same access to the same information, whether it be TV news or online news, but the lens and perspective in which people view the current news can be vastly different. I can tell you that. But there are people who have opinions that seem to be just out of left field, on the border of either conspiracy thinking or wishful thinking. There are always doomsayers who constantly talk about an upcoming real estate crash and a shattered economy. Maybe I should be doing that so I can improve my channel's performance. There's this guy who has been preaching doom and gloom nonsense for the last 20 years, despite some of the most prosperous times in recent history. Being in the U.S., and the U.S. financial system as it is, however flawed, to me, it's still the best place to be compared to most of the world. It's no accident that people all over the world are trying to place their money into the U.S. financial system. This is why the American dollar is still the standard for most of the world. However, there are others who view the market in a blinding, naive, and wishful thinking way. They see things from a very narrow lens. This tends to happen with a segment of the affluent population who are well-resourced and largely shielded from ground level effects. But most of us are mere mortals. We are regular people trying to coexist with our neighbors. Instinctively, we know that situations that happen elsewhere and other people can potentially touch our own lives. That is a big reason why most of us pay attention to financial and economic news. We're trying to get ahead of the situation and plan our future. It's important to remember that at the center of this current mortgage rates situation is Chairman Jerome Powell and the Federal Reserve. Whether we like it or not, their decisions impact all of us. And another thing that is also inevitable is that I'm going to ask you to hit that like button and subscribe to this channel to stay updated. Unfortunately, mortgage rates have a disproportionate effect on the overall economy. This is one reason why there has been discussions of a housing recession versus a general recession. In the last recession, there was no distinction between a housing recession and a general recession, like there is today. Mortgages are the primary financial vehicle most people use to purchase real estate today. So when mortgage rates change, the purchasing power changes, which has a huge ripple effect throughout the broader economy. Even if we don't plan on buying or selling properties, we are affected because the market value of properties impact the equity of our properties and the property taxes we pay. It's all connected and interrelated. Jerome Powell publicly stated earlier this year that they were going to put an end to inflation. That was true then, it's still true today as I make this video. A lot of CEOs at big companies took him seriously and began making changes in their companies earlier this year. But interestingly, consumers, it was business as usual, keep spending as usual. And the fact of the matter is that there was just too much money sitting around doing nothing, along with the pent-up energy from the COVID lockdowns. People were not cutting back on spending, although there were shifts in buying patterns. A lot of people thought that the Fed might not take the aggressive actions they did to tame inflation. We now know that this was no bluff. The Fed is serious about taming inflation.
My main message has not changed at all since Jackson Hole. The FOMC is strongly resolved to bring inflation down to 2%, and we will keep at it until the job is done.
For some property owners, they didn't sell their properties fast enough when they had the chance. Now there are a lot of properties sitting a lot longer on the market with a lot of people making pricing adjustments. Jerome Powell said that there would be pain, and he is going to be right.
While higher interest rates, slower growth, and softer labor market conditions will bring down inflation, they will also bring some pain to households and businesses. These are the unfortunate costs of reducing inflation.
The pain is being witnessed now in real time. There are going to be a lot of involuntary landlords for people who are forced to move for one reason or another in the next couple of years. For example, a lot of people with their VA mortgages are going to get hurt when they get new orders and stuck with a house with little or no equity. They also have little mortgage paydown. They won't be able to get their VA certificate back to buy another home until they're able to dispose of their prior mortgage. And it's very hard to do this when a VA buyer puts zero down payment and have little or no equity in the property. I saw a lot of this quiet suffering during the Great Recession, and I believe that groups of people will quietly suffer again going into 2023. But this will never make the news. Here's another example. A lot of people who are forced to relocate for new jobs are going to have a tough time buying homes with these higher interest rates. From my perspective, the underlying cost of the house is really the main killer, not the interest rate. But people want to solely blame the interest rate. People who need to relocate will simply be forced to rent until they can improve their overall financial situation, or until the market changes. Companies have already slowed hiring, cut hours, and started layoffs. This will hurt people's ability to pay rent and their ability to pay mortgage payments. They may even fall behind, increasing the likelihood of foreclosure and evictions. I don't want to scream that there's going to be a huge wave of foreclosures. It's too early to tell. However, what I do know is there is currently a lot of talk about a housing recession in the last couple of months. In my view, the housing recession has only just begun and will continue well into 2023. That means that sellers who bought with low down payments will be stuck in their houses until they have sufficient paydown in their mortgages. These potential sellers and homeowners will not be able to depend on ever-increasing prices to bail them out of their current mortgage. Of course, sellers stacked up with equity and large mortgage paydowns will always have options. But the question is, are they willing to take on new mortgages with higher interest rates? They may or may not, even if they can afford to. This is one key factor I will be looking at in the months to come. Looking back, people bought houses in 2000 when mortgage rates were 8%. I was one of those guys. I still pay 8% on a FHA mortgage from over 20 years ago. So for me, 8% mortgage is something I've lived with and taken in stride. However, over 20 years have passed. My gut reaction is that 7 to 8% mortgage rates today is simply not going to be viewed the same way 7% to 8% mortgage rates were in 2000. The big difference is that the underlying cost of homes is dramatically different now than it was 20 years ago. I think everyone can understand that paying 8% on a $100,000 house is far more appealing than paying 8% on a $500,000 house. Same percentage, but the actual dollars are dramatically higher. And that's why there is emotional trauma right now regarding discussions of these 7% mortgages. And because of this trauma, buyer demand will continue to dry up as we head into 2023. This will cause home prices to level off a bit. If not, there will most certainly be fewer buyers willing to take on a 7 or 8% mortgage. Now, as a side note, one thing that I has not talked about in the press very much is that there are a lot of investors sitting on a pile of cash biding their time. Those investors are quietly watching the situation in the markets and having conversations with their inner circle. As overall interest rates increase, these investors are making even more money for this idle cash because high yield savings interest rates are higher than it's been for many years. You may want to check out some of my videos on high yield savings account. I will provide links in the description below. While the current situation is not the same as it was during the Great Recession, there are a lot of people who learned that there were buying opportunities during that time. These investors will eventually come off the sidelines and deploy their cash and buy properties outright when they feel the property prices have sufficiently softened up. Unlike the Great Recession, there are far more institutional buyers this time around. Ironically, they might be the people that might save the real estate market from any real estate crash. Generally, I don't think there will be a widespread real estate crash, but I do think there will be pockets throughout the US where many of these people will be hurt. However, that won't change the pain from individual buyers who depend on a mortgage to buy a home. Individual buyers are going to have a very tough time justifying or qualifying for 7% mortgages with these inflated home prices. On a personal note, you might find it interesting that I, along with some of my investor friends that bought properties 15 to 20 years ago, still pay on these older mortgages with 6 to 8% interest. All the upset in the news is about new mortgages for new purchases at interest rates of 6 to 8%. Now, I believe interest rates can go up to 8% because there is historical precedent for it. I also believe Jerome Powell and the Feds are serious about stopping inflation. I am mindful that people's sensibilities today are going to be different than it was 20 years ago. Maybe something will change as we head into the last quarter of 2022, but right now, I have no reason to believe anything will change as we head towards the end of 2022 and enter 2023. Certainly, I don't have a crystal ball, but we all have a mind to use to chart our course. What I generally recommend is that people not succumb to pressure into doing things you don't want to. Buying properties is serious business. I know, I've bought many of them. Being well positioned, prepared, and good timing can net great results. And if you've made it to the end of this video, I congratulate you, because right now there's a lot of buyer remorse out there from the craziness from late 2020 and 2021. Don't be one of those people that have buyer remorse. Get educated, pay attention, and listen very carefully. Be discriminating on who you listen to. Thank you for watching. Do me a favor and hit that like button. Don't forget to subscribe, and I will see you in my next video.